Hey everyone! Tonight, the king is sleeping with another woman, and almost everyone at court knows her name. She may receive jewelry, money, rooms inside the palace, and favors for her family. No one arrests the king, but if the queen is accused of sleeping with another man, she may face prison, treason, and execution. Henry VIII had relationships outside marriage, and one of his mistresses, Bessie Blount, gave birth to a son he publicly acknowledged. Yet two of his queens, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, were executed after accusations involving other men. The difference was not simply that kings were allowed to behave badly. Hereditary monarchy depended upon the queen producing children whose father could not be questioned. The mother was obvious. The father depended upon trust. If another man entered the queen's bed, his child might one day inherit the throne. A private affair could become a threat to the entire kingdom. Why could kings keep mistresses while queens were watched so closely? And how did fear over royal bloodlines turn adultery into treason? Tonight, we will enter the private rooms of royal courts and examine the unequal rules that gave kings freedom while placing queens in danger. Before we begin, you can subscribe if you enjoy calm journeys through the private rules behind public power. Then settle back and imagine a court where the king's affair creates gossip, but the queen's suspected affair can end at the scaffold. The first thing to understand is that no law of nature made royal adultery harmless for men and dangerous for women. The difference was created by a political system. A hereditary monarchy transferred authority through family. The crown did not pass to the most talented child in the kingdom. It passed according to rules of blood, marriage, sex, age, and legitimacy. Those rules varied from one kingdom to another. They also changed across time, yet almost everywhere. One problem remained. A queen gave birth in public knowledge. The father could never be observed in the same way. Before modern genetic testing, paternity rested upon marriage and controlled access. If a married woman gave birth, the law usually treated her husband as the father. This assumption allowed households to function without investigating every pregnancy. At a royal court, however, the child did not inherit only a name or a farm. The child might inherit armies, taxes, palaces, legal authority, and claims over several countries. A doubtful father created a doubtful future. Imagine a prince born to a queen. Bells ring, clergy give thanks, ambassadors write to their rulers. Noble families calculate which marriages the child may one day make. Coins, prayers, portraits, and official announcements place the infant within a dynasty. 20 years later, that child may become king. If rumors then claim that his father was a courtier rather than the previous monarch, every rival gains a weapon. A disputed bed can become a disputed throne. This is why the queen's household was organized around access. Ladies-in-waiting slept nearby. Servants carried clothing and messages. Guards watched doors. Chamber officers knew who entered and when. The queen was rarely alone, especially while traveling. Privacy existed, but it was surrounded by witnesses. The same people who helped her dress could later be questioned about her conduct. A woman chosen for companionship might become evidence. The king was also watched, but for a different reason. Courtiers wanted access to him, because access produced favor. They noted his interests, moods, illnesses, and relationships. His bedchamber was political. Yet no one needed to prove that the queen's children came from the king through constant surveillance of his sexual behavior. His affairs could produce illegitimate children. Those children created complications, but they did not automatically enter the lawful succession. The queen's children did. That legal distinction protected the dynasty while excusing the man who led it. Excusing does not mean approving. Christian teaching condemned adultery by husbands as well as wives. Priests preached against sexual sin. A king's wife could suffer humiliation. Foreign ambassadors reported scandal. Subjects might interpret immorality as evidence that the ruler lacked self-control. Mistresses could divide factions and influence appointments. Money spent upon them could provoke resentment. A king who seduced another man's wife insulted a household and challenged social order. Royal adultery had consequences. It simply did not usually create the same danger of false succession. The difference between sin and treason is central to this story. A king's affair was commonly treated as a moral failure, a domestic insult, or a political inconvenience. A queen's affair could be described as an attack upon the crown itself. The act was sexual. The feared result was dynastic. Royal marriage was therefore unlike most marriages, even when it contained affection. A king did not select a wife only because he loved her. Counselors compared bloodlines, territories, dowries, religious alliances, and the chance of children. A foreign princess might travel hundreds of miles to marry a man she had never met. Her body carried a treaty. Her fertility carried the future of the agreement. The wedding transformed her position. She became queen consort, the king's lawful wife. She shared his ceremonial magnificence, maintained a household, distributed patronage, received ambassadors, supported religious causes, and sometimes acted as regent. But the honor came with one duty that overshadowed almost everything else: produce legitimate heirs. A queen could be intelligent, charitable, politically skilled, and widely loved. If no living son appeared, the court began to count failures. Pregnancy was watched closely. A missed period became diplomatic news. Changes in appetite or clothing encouraged rumors. Physicians, ladies, and ambassadors searched for signs. When pregnancy was confirmed, prayers began. When it ended in miscarriage or stillbirth, private grief became public consequence. The queen mourned a child. The dynasty mourned a lost solution. This pressure did not excuse adultery by kings. It explains why the rules were built unevenly. The king's sexual freedom could create bastards, jealousy, and factions. The queen's sexual freedom threatened to place an unrecognized father inside the official bloodline. A patriarchal society chose to control the woman rather than question the entire structure. Legitimacy was not simply biological. It was legal and political. A king might publicly acknowledge an illegitimate son. He could give the boy land, a title, education, and marriage opportunities. He might even use him in government, but acknowledgement did not necessarily make the child heir to the crown. Marriage separated royal offspring into categories. The queen produced legitimate dynasty. The mistress produced royal blood without the same right. These boundaries were never perfectly stable. Medieval rulers sometimes succeeded despite disputed legitimacy. Bastard sons could become powerful enough to take crowns. Kings could ask popes, parliaments, or legal authorities to legitimize children. Different kingdoms followed different customs. Yet by the later medieval and early modern periods, lawful marriage carried enormous weight in Western European succession. A king could love an illegitimate son. He could not assume the kingdom would accept him. Henry VIII discovered both sides of this system. During his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, he fathered a son with Elizabeth Blount, better known as Bessie Blount. She was a young woman in the Queen's household. The relationship was not announced through official ceremony, but it was no secret once the child arrived. On the 17th of June, 1519, Bessie gave birth to a boy. Henry acknowledged him. The child received the name Henry Fitzroy. Fitzroy meant son of the king. The name displayed illegitimacy and royal blood at the same time. The birth mattered because Catherine of Aragon had not given Henry a surviving son. She had endured several pregnancies, but only their daughter Mary lived beyond childhood. The king now had proof that he could father a boy. The proof came from another woman. Henry celebrated the child. Fitzroy received an education suitable for high rank. At the age of 6, he was made Duke of Richmond and Somerset and Earl of Nottingham. He later received important offices and a household of his own. His rise caused speculation. Was Henry preparing an illegitimate son to inherit if no lawful prince appeared? No final answer survives. The possibility itself reveals the weakness of the Tudor succession. Fitzroy's mother did not become queen. Bessie Blount received rewards and later married. She had given the king what his wife had not yet provided. But her son remained outside the ordinary, lawful line. Her relationship could embarrass Catherine. It did not replace her marriage. The contrast would have been painful. Catherine had married Henry as part of a great dynastic union. She had served as regent while he campaigned in France. She had represented Spanish royal blood, English queenship, and lawful succession. Bessie gave birth to a healthy son. The court could see the result without changing the law. Henry also had a relationship with Mary Boleyn, sister of Anne Boleyn. The exact duration and importance of the affair are uncertain. Henry later acknowledged that a relationship had occurred when questions of prohibited kinship arose during his pursuit of Anne. Mary was married during part of the period. Her children were not publicly acknowledged as Henry's, and claims that the king fathered them remain unproven. The uncertainty is useful. A king could conduct an affair without creating an official child. Silence protected everyone until politics required admission. Catherine of Aragon endured Henry's relationships while maintaining the dignity expected of a queen. Open confrontation offered little advantage. A queen who attacked every mistress risked appearing jealous or politically unstable. A queen who remained silent watched another woman receive attention inside her own household. Patience became part of the role. The mistress also lived under constraint. She depended upon the king's interest. A gift could arrive one month and silence the next. Marriage to another man might provide security, but place her in a household aware of the royal affair. Pregnancy carried danger. A son might receive recognition. A daughter might disappear into ordinary, noble life. Nothing was guaranteed. The familiar image of the all-powerful royal mistress, therefore, needs care. Some mistresses gained remarkable influence. Many did not. The position had no secure law, salary, or term of office. It rested upon private favor. The closer a woman came to power, the more rivals watched for the moment favor ended. Anne Boleyn understood that becoming the king's mistress did not offer enough protection. When Henry became interested in her during the 1520s, she resisted the ordinary role available to women desired by kings. Her motives remain debated. Religious conviction, personal ambition, family strategy, and awareness of her sister's experience may all have mattered. Whatever the reason, Anne did not simply accept a temporary place. Henry would have to marry her. This decision changed England. Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon stood in the way. He sought an annulment, arguing that the marriage had been invalid because Catherine had previously been married to his brother Arthur. Catherine insisted that her first marriage had never been consummated and that her marriage to Henry was lawful. The dispute lasted years. It involved canon law, diplomacy, the papacy, the emperor, parliament, clergy, and the king's conscience. A private desire became a constitutional transformation. Henry's need for a male heir made the matter urgent. Catherine was growing older. Anne appeared capable of providing the future he wanted. The king did not merely wish to exchange one woman for another. He wanted children by Anne to possess unquestioned legitimacy. Mistress was insufficient. The crown required wife. Henry eventually broke with papal authority, married Anne, and had his first marriage declared invalid. Anne was crowned queen in 1533. Her transformation was extraordinary. The woman pursued as a mistress now occupied the ceremonial position Catherine had defended. She had gained the title designed to protect her children. The title would not protect her. Anne gave birth to Elizabeth in September 1533. The child was healthy, but she was a daughter. The official celebrations continued, though plans expecting a prince had to be adjusted. Further pregnancies ended without the surviving son Henry expected. By early 1536, the marriage stood under severe pressure. Henry had begun showing interest in Jane Seymour, one of Anne's ladies. The pattern repeated inside the Queen's household. The Queen was surrounded by women chosen to serve her. Some were also close enough for the king to notice. A system intended to protect royal domestic order created the king's next opportunity. Anne could not respond as Henry had responded to rivals. She could not imprison Jane for attracting the king. She could not publicly take a lover of her own. She could argue, attempt to remove the woman from court, or rely upon her position as queen. Her power depended upon the same husband whose attention was moving elsewhere. In May 1536, Anne's household collapsed with astonishing speed. Men connected to the court were arrested. Musician Mark Smeaton confessed under circumstances that remain uncertain. Henry Norris, William Brereton, Francis Weston, and Anne's brother George Boleyn were accused of sexual relations with the Queen. Anne was accused of adultery, incest, and plotting the king's death. The charges listed encounters at particular places and times. Modern examination has shown that some allegations appear implausible because Anne was elsewhere or had recently given birth. The evidence was weak. Most historians regard her as innocent of the sexual charges. Yet Tudor justice did not require the kind of proof expected in a modern criminal court. Once the king and his government supported the prosecution, escape became nearly impossible. Why did adultery become treason? Under the old treason law, imagining the king's death could be punished as an attack upon the monarch. The prosecution claimed Anne and her alleged lovers had discussed Henry's death. Her supposed sexual conduct also endangered succession and dishonored royal authority. The case joined bed, bloodline, and kingly body into one accusation. Anne's adultery was not treated like Henry's. Henry's affairs might violate marriage. Anne's alleged affairs were made to violate the state. The difference was written into the prosecution. Her trial took place in the Tower of London. Peers judged her. The outcome was almost certain before proceedings began. Anne defended herself, but the charges created a world in which ordinary courtly conversation could be interpreted as seduction and treason. A queen who joked with men had failed modesty. A queen who spoke of the king's death had imagined succession. A queen who produced no son had already weakened confidence. Anne was convicted. The marriage that had changed the church in England was annulled. Her daughter Elizabeth was declared illegitimate. On the 19th of May, 1536, Anne was executed by sword. Henry married Jane Seymour 11 days after Anne's death. The speed reveals the value of the accusation. Adultery did not only punish Anne, it cleared the succession, removed her family, freed the king to remarry, and rewrote the meaning of the previous 3 years. The queen became a traitor. The marriage became invalid. The child became illegitimate. One prosecution solved several political problems at once. This does not mean every person involved followed one secret plan from the beginning. Anne's fall remains debated because motives and timing were complex. Thomas Cromwell played a central role. Henry authorized the result. Court factions benefited. The Queen's failure to produce a son mattered. Her enemies supplied accusations. The legal machinery converted political collapse into criminal certainty. Sexual reputation made the conversion possible. A charge of poor policy would not erase a marriage. A charge of adultery attacked the Queen's defining duty. If she had admitted other men to her body, every pregnancy became suspect. Even Elizabeth's legitimacy could be clouded, though no serious evidence challenged Henry's paternity. Rumor did not need to prove a substitute child. It needed to make the Queen unworthy of trust. Anne's story demonstrates the danger of being both intimate and political. As mistress, she could influence the king, but lacked the title she wanted. As queen, she gained rank, but became responsible for succession. The same closeness that raised her made every private word evidence. The court watched her because she mattered. Jane Seymour became queen and gave Henry a son, Edward. She died soon after childbirth. Henry remembered her as the wife who fulfilled the dynastic task. Her early death protected her reputation from the conflicts that damaged Catherine and Anne. She became the successful mother in the royal story. Henry's next marriage, to Anne of Cleves, was arranged for diplomacy. When the king rejected the match, the marriage was annulled. Anne cooperated and received a generous settlement. Her survival shows that a queen's fall did not require execution. She was not accused of adultery. The government used non-consummation, consent, and earlier agreements to dissolve the marriage. The method matched the political need. Then came Catherine Howard. She was probably still a teenager when Henry chose her. He was nearing 50, physically unwell, and more than 30 years older. Catherine belonged to the Howard family and had entered the household of Anne of Cleves. Once again, a woman serving a queen became the king's new wife. Henry married Catherine in July 1540. He praised her youth and beauty and showered her with gifts. For a time, the marriage appeared to restore his confidence, but Catherine carried a past that became dangerous only after she was queen. As a girl in the household of the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, Catherine had been involved with Henry Manox and Francis Derham. The nature of these relationships is difficult to reconstruct. Evidence suggests sexual contact and possibly a promise of marriage with Derham. Catherine was young, surrounded by poor supervision and vulnerable to older men. What mattered in 1541 was not only what had happened, it was what she had failed to tell the king. Information about Catherine's past reached Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. Henry initially refused to believe it. An investigation followed. Former members of the household were questioned. Derham was arrested. Then the inquiry uncovered secret meetings between Catherine and Thomas Culpeper after her marriage to the king. Catherine had written Culpeper a letter. Its surviving words expressed longing to remain in his company. The letter has often been treated as proof of a willing affair. More recent interpretations have considered whether Culpeper's character and power placed Catherine under pressure. The evidence supports secret contact. It does not reveal every detail of consent or physical conduct. For the Tudor government, uncertainty was enough. Catherine's earlier sexual history could suggest a pre-contract that threatened the validity of her marriage. Her meetings with Culpeper could suggest adultery. Her failure to disclose the past could be treated as deception against the king. Every route led away from queenship. The law was strengthened to fit the case. The 1541 legislation made it treason for a woman marrying the king to conceal previous sexual conduct, and treason for a queen to encourage adultery. Catherine was not given the same public trial as Anne. Parliamentary process helped condemn her. The rule was written around the danger her story represented. Culpeper and Derham were executed first. Catherine was taken to the Tower. On the 13th of February, 1542, she was beheaded. Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, who had helped arrange the meetings, died immediately after her. Catherine's case differed from Anne's. The accusations against Anne were almost certainly fabricated or constructed from harmless conduct. Catherine had concealed significant relationships from her past and met Culpeper secretly as queen. But the unequal structure surrounding both women was the same. Henry's affairs did not threaten his life. Their suspected or actual sexual conduct did. The difference was not measured by emotional betrayal. Henry had betrayed wives repeatedly. It was measured by who controlled legitimacy. A king could acknowledge a bastard and keep him outside the lawful line. A queen could not privately declare that a child belonged to someone else without destabilizing the crown. Therefore, the court treated her body as guarded territory. This logic extended beyond Tudor England. In 1314, the French royal family was shaken by the Tour de Nesle affair. 3 women, married to the sons of King Philip IV, were accused in a scandal involving adultery. Margaret of Burgundy and Blanche of Burgundy were accused of relations with two brothers, Philippe and Gautier d'Aunay. Joan of Burgundy was accused of knowing and assisting. The men were tortured and executed brutally. The women faced imprisonment. Margaret died in custody. Blanche remained confined and later entered religious life. Joan was eventually cleared or restored and became queen when her husband inherited. These women were not all queens at the moment of accusation, but they were wives of royal heirs. Their children stood near the succession. The scandal therefore raised the same question that would later surround Anne Boleyn. Could the dynasty trust the maternity and paternity of the next generation? The affair occurred as the Capetian male line approached crisis. Philip IV's sons would become kings, but failed to leave surviving sons who continued the direct line. Questions of legitimacy, female inheritance, and royal succession contributed to disputes that helped shape the beginning of the 100 Years' War. The bedchamber did not cause every later conflict, but sexual accusation entered a dynasty already vulnerable to failure. The punishment again moved unevenly. A prince's affair could produce scandal. A princess's affair could corrupt the bloodline through children presented as legitimate. The political imagination treated her sexuality as a hidden route by which an outsider entered the dynasty. This fear appears throughout royal history because monarchy depends upon visible ceremony covering invisible conception. Everyone can witness a wedding. Everyone can witness a birth. No one can witness paternity continuously. The court fills the gap with surveillance and reputation. Queens learned to live within that system. They selected attendants carefully where choice was possible. They avoided being alone with men. They understood that letters could be intercepted. They performed devotion, modesty, and loyalty in public. The performance was not necessarily false. It was protection. A queen's enemies watched for mistakes, a door closed at the wrong time, a servant carrying a message, a joke repeated without context, a gift exchanged, a pregnancy dated inconveniently. None proved adultery alone. Together, they could build a political story. The king's mistress faced surveillance of another kind. Courtiers wanted to know whether favor was rising or falling. They watched where she sat, which rooms she received, what jewels she wore, and whether the king visited. Her body did not guard legitimacy. Her access guarded patronage. This made the mistress useful. A petitioner unable to reach the king could approach her relatives or servants. She might mention a name during a private conversation. She could recommend an office holder, support an artist, request mercy, or help a family obtain a marriage. Her influence was rarely formal. That made it difficult to measure and easy to fear. It also made her a target. Ministers blamed mistresses for unpopular decisions because private influence could not be examined publicly. Religious critics treated them as symbols of corruption. The queen's supporters saw humiliation. Rival women competed for attention. When the king's interest moved elsewhere, the court moved with it. Royal favor created a brilliant room with a weak foundation. The mistress could possess apartments, money, servants, and access. She could not command the king to continue loving her. Every gift remained connected to one person's desire. France developed the role of royal mistress more visibly than Tudor England. At the court of Louis XIV, certain mistresses became recognized figures with apartments, households, and influence. The phrase official mistress can be misleading because no modern government office formally legalized adultery, yet the court understood who held the king's favor. Recognition created a position without creating security. Louis married Maria Theresa of Spain in 1660. The marriage helped seal peace between France and Spain. It was a diplomatic union with enormous ceremonial importance. Maria Theresa became queen and gave birth to 6 children, though only the eldest son survived to adulthood. Louis also maintained relationships with other women. Louise de la Vallière became one of his first prominent mistresses. She bore him children. 2 who survived were legitimized. Louis could acknowledge them, give them names and rank, and arrange their futures. They remained distinct from the legitimate dauphin born by the queen. The court lived with both families. The queen embodied lawful alliance. The mistress embodied private favor. The legitimate son carried the ordinary succession. The legitimized children received royal blood without equal claim. The palace organized contradiction into separate rooms. Madame de Montespan later displaced La Vallière in the king's affection. She was married when her relationship with Louis began. She became one of the most influential women at Versailles. Her apartment stood near the king's, with private access. Her wit, beauty, luxury, and patronage made her circle important to anyone seeking advancement. Louis and Montespan had 7 children. 6 were legitimized. Their upbringing was entrusted to the woman who became Madame de Maintenon. The king's illegitimate family acquired titles and marriages that connected them to the highest nobility. Royal adultery produced a recognized branch of power. Maria Theresa remained queen. Her position was ceremonially superior. Yet the mistress could dominate the daily life of court. This distinction must have been painfully visible. The queen held the crown. The mistress held attention. The king could move between them because the court separated legitimacy from intimacy. He required the queen for dynasty and ceremony. He desired the mistress for companionship, attraction, or affection. The women could not move between those categories with the same freedom. Montespan's influence encouraged petitioners and enemies. Artists benefited from her patronage. Families sought her favor. Ministers understood that her private words might affect the king. But her power did not become permanent law. When Louis's interest faded and the affair of the poisons damaged her reputation, she lost access. Madame de Maintenon took the place nearest the king. Maintenon had served as governess to Louis's children with Montespan. She gradually gained the king's trust. After Queen Maria Theresa died in 1683, Louis is believed to have married Maintenon secretly. The former governess and companion entered a marriage that was real but not publicly equal to the king's first dynastic union. Her rise shows how royal intimacy could create extraordinary movement. It also shows that the final boundary remained rank. Louis's mistresses did not risk execution simply for sleeping with him. They risked disgrace, exile from court, loss of income, religious pressure, and political isolation. These consequences were serious. They were still different from the scaffold, waiting for a queen accused of admitting another man. The king's acknowledged children also demonstrate why his affairs appeared manageable. Louis could legitimize them by royal action. He could grant titles. He could arrange marriages. He could bring them near the dynasty without pretending they had been born to the queen. Their origin was public. No hidden father threatened the line. A queen's adulterous child would work in the opposite direction. The child might appear legitimate while carrying another man's blood. The danger lay in concealment. The king's bastard was known. The queen's imagined bastard was disguised as heir. The monarchy feared the second more than the first. This fear made female chastity a public resource. A queen's reputation reassured subjects that succession was clean. Portraits, ceremonies, piety, and household discipline supported that message. Her private virtue became part of royal propaganda. The king's masculinity followed another script. Many courts praised conquest, fertility, and sexual success in men, even while religion condemned adultery. A ruler surrounded by women could be treated as vigorous. A queen surrounded by male admirers could be treated as dangerous. The double standard joined politics, with gender expectations already present throughout society. Men were expected to control households. A husband whose wife committed adultery could be mocked as a cuckold, as though her action revealed his weakness. For a king, the insult became national. A queen's affair suggested that the ruler could not control even his own bedchamber. Enemies could turn sexual betrayal into evidence of failed kingship. This helps explain the fury attached to accusations. The issue was not only whose child might inherit. The king's masculine authority had been publicly challenged. Punishing the queen and alleged lover restored hierarchy. Their bodies became the place where his honor was repaired. Henry VIII's prosecution of Anne Boleyn included the claim that she had mocked his abilities and discussed his death. The charges attacked him as husband, man, and king. Execution answered all three. A king's own adultery did not make him a cuckold. It could even reinforce the image that he possessed women beyond the lawful wife. The same sexual act carried opposite political symbolism depending upon who performed it. Religious teaching never fully resolved this contradiction. Christian marriage required fidelity from both partners. Moralists criticized kings. Confessors urged reform. Mistresses sometimes withdrew into convents or adopted lives of penance. Louis XIV's later court became more publicly devout. Royal adultery remained sin, but courts distinguished sin from succession. A queen could appeal to religion for dignity. Catherine of Aragon built her defense upon lawful marriage, conscience, and faith. She insisted she was Henry's true wife. Her public virtue strengthened support. Yet virtue could not force the king to remain faithful or preserve her position once he controlled the church and government. Maria Theresa of Spain also endured Louis XIV's affairs within a Catholic court that understood adultery was wrong. Ceremonial respect did not remove private humiliation. The Queen's moral superiority could be praised precisely because everyone expected her to suffer quietly. Patience became another gendered performance. Royal mistresses were sometimes presented as the opposite. They were blamed for temptation, luxury, ambition, and disorder. This language allowed the king to remain the central actor while assigning moral danger to the woman he pursued. When favor ended, he could return to piety. She carried the scandal. The mistress might have limited freedom to refuse. A king's attention was not an ordinary invitation. Rejecting him could damage a family. Accepting him could damage a reputation. Relatives might encourage the relationship because they expected offices and money. The woman stood inside a decision shaped by power. Anne Boleyn's resistance demonstrates this clearly. Refusing to become a mistress did not allow her to return to ordinary court life. Henry continued the pursuit. The only secure alternative she could imagine was marriage. That solution made her queen and eventually exposed her to a greater danger. Bessie Blount's acceptance produced a different life. She gave Henry a son, received acknowledgement, and moved into marriage outside the royal bed. Her name survives because the king desired her. Her own account of the relationship does not. History records the child more clearly than the mother's choices. Louise de la Vallière eventually withdrew into religious life. Her story was shaped by guilt, displacement, and the arrival of Montespan. The king's affection created a position that another woman could take. Retirement offered escape from competition, but also confirmed that the relationship had no permanent place. Montespan's fall followed another route. She had once stood at the center of pleasure and patronage. Later, suspicion connected her name to the affair of the poisons, a vast scandal involving alleged poisoning, fortune-telling, and illicit rituals. Her direct guilt remains debated. The damage to reputation was enough to assist her removal. A mistress's sexual access invited stories about dangerous influence. If people believed she controlled the king through attraction, they could also believe she used magic, poison, or manipulation to preserve that control. Private favor produced explanations outside ordinary politics. Queens faced similar stories, but with succession added. Anne Boleyn was accused by enemies of witchcraft and sexual corruption, though the formal charges focused upon treasonous adultery. Catherine Howard became a symbol of uncontrolled youth. Marie Antoinette, much later, faced pornographic accusations of affairs and depravity that exceeded evidence. Sexual slander was one of the easiest ways to make a queen politically monstrous. A queen was visible enough to attract blame and private enough to invite invention. Most subjects never entered her rooms. They depended upon pamphlets, sermons, court reports, songs, and rumor. The hidden bedchamber became a blank surface. Enemies filled it. This is why evidence in royal adultery cases requires unusual care. Confessions could follow pressure. Letters might be genuine but ambiguous. Servants could repeat gossip as fact. Dates could be impossible. Trials could serve outcomes decided elsewhere. A charge tells us what authorities wanted people to believe. It does not automatically tell us what happened. Anne Boleyn's indictment survives. Its detail creates an appearance of certainty, yet detail can be manufactured. Specific rooms and dates make a story legal. When those dates conflict with the Queen's known location, specificity becomes evidence against the prosecution. Catherine Howard's letter to Culpeper is different. It offers her own words, but words require context. Affection, fear, dependence, and pressure can produce similar language. The document proves contact and emotional intensity. It cannot alone reconstruct every meeting. The court did not need modern certainty. It needed a politically usable conclusion. Anne had betrayed the king. Catherine had deceived him. The law absorbed uncertainty and returned guilt. For ordinary women, adultery also carried unequal consequences. Church courts could impose penance. Communities punished reputation. A woman might lose support, property, or marriage prospects. A husband's adultery was condemned but often tolerated more easily. Royal courts magnified a social double standard already present below them. The Queen's punishment was exceptional because her marriage was exceptional. An ordinary woman's suspected lover could not father the next king. Her conduct did not become treason against a realm. Rank made the danger larger. At the same time, queens possessed resources ordinary women lacked. They had households, family alliances, diplomatic support, money, and public visibility. Catherine of Aragon's resistance lasted years because she was a Spanish princess, aunt to Emperor Charles V, and a respected queen. A woman of lower rank could have been removed more quietly. Power did not eliminate vulnerability. It changed its form. The queen was difficult to discard because many states had invested in her marriage. This difficulty encouraged governments to transform private conflict into legal argument. Annulment, treason, pre-contract, and succession became tools for solving the problem. The king's mistress usually arrived without foreign treaties. Removing her required less ceremony. Favor ended. A marriage was arranged. A pension was granted. A convent received her. The court turned toward someone else. This ease made mistresses useful but replaceable. Queens were politically heavy. Mistresses were politically flexible. The king could move one without renegotiating international peace. The comparison therefore contains a paradox. The queen possessed higher rank and greater lawful dignity. The mistress sometimes possessed greater daily access. The queen's position was stronger in ceremony. The mistress's position could be stronger in private. Neither woman controlled the king's choice. Courtiers learned to navigate both. They bowed to the queen. They visited the mistress. They praised lawful heirs. They sought favors through illegitimate children. Court life required respect for official order and attention to unofficial reality. A person who ignored the mistress might lose opportunity. A person who insulted the queen might commit a serious offense. Success depended upon recognizing two maps of power. The public map showed titles, the private map showed affection. The king stood at the center of both. His ability to maintain the contradiction was itself a form of authority. He could define one woman as wife and another as favorite. He could acknowledge some children and exclude others. He could turn his own desire into patronage. He could turn suspicion of his wife into law. This power was not unlimited. Dynastic marriage constrained him. Religion constrained him. Public opinion, foreign policy, and noble factions constrained him. Henry VIII spent years and transformed the English church because he could not simply replace Catherine of Aragon overnight. Louis XIV married Maria Theresa because peace with Spain mattered more than his earlier love. Kings operated within systems, even when systems favored them. Mistresses could also influence those systems. Madame de Montespan supported artists and writers. Royal favorites helped arrange marriages and offices. Their children entered noble families and changed networks of power. Private relationships produced public consequences. The distinction between bedchamber and government was never complete. Yet influence should not be confused with rule. A mistress rarely controlled every decision attributed to her. Courtiers blamed her because the king remained harder to attack. If an unpopular policy appeared, critics imagined it had been whispered into his ear. The woman became a screen placed between ruler and responsibility. Anne Boleyn received similar blame before becoming queen. Cardinal Wolsey and others treated her influence as a threat. Henry's decisions appeared to come from her persuasion rather than his will. After her fall, the same king who had pursued her could present himself as deceived. The woman's power expanded in accusation because it reduced his guilt. Royal sexuality, therefore, created useful stories for men. The king was vigorous when affairs pleased the court. He was bewitched when a woman became unpopular. He was betrayed when a queen threatened his honor. He was merciful when punishment was reduced from burning to beheading. The narrative adjusted to preserve kingship. Women also used available narratives. A queen presented herself as lawful wife, faithful mother, and victim of injustice. A mistress presented affection as service and sought security for children. A fallen favorite embraced repentance. These roles were not necessarily dishonest. They were languages the court understood. The children carried consequences long after the relationships ended. Henry Fitzroy died in 1536 at the age of 17. His death removed one possible solution to Henry's succession problem only weeks after Anne Boleyn's execution. Henry still had no surviving legitimate son until Edward's birth the following year. Charles II of England later demonstrated the opposite problem. He acknowledged numerous illegitimate children by several mistresses. Some became dukes and entered the highest aristocracy, yet his marriage to Catherine of Braganza produced no surviving child. When Charles died in 1685, none of his many sons inherited the crown. His brother James became king. This is perhaps the clearest demonstration of legitimacy's power. Charles possessed fertility. He possessed sons. He possessed the authority to enrich them. He did not possess an accepted lawful heir. The crown ignored the crowded illegitimate family and moved sideways to his brother. One illegitimate son, the Duke of Monmouth, later claimed the throne against James II. He was popular in parts of the country and Protestant, while James was Catholic. But Charles had never established him as legitimate. Monmouth's rebellion failed. He was captured and executed. Royal blood without lawful birth could carry a man toward the crown and still leave him outside it. The king's affairs were therefore not politically harmless. Charles II's lack of legitimate children contributed to a succession problem that shaped the final years of his reign. His illegitimate sons possessed rank and ambition without a clear lawful path. The system contained the danger but did not erase it. Louis XIV faced similar tensions when he raised legitimized children to extraordinary status. Late in his reign, he attempted to bring certain legitimized sons closer to succession if the legitimate line failed. The move disturbed traditional princes of the blood. After Louis's death, parts of the arrangement were reversed. Even an absolute king could not transform bastardy into equality without resistance. Legitimacy belonged to more than the father's will. Nobles, courts, laws, churches, and political communities all participated. A king could announce a son. He could not guarantee universal acceptance. This limits the simple idea that kings were free. They enjoyed far greater sexual freedom than queens. But every affair created a possible child, faction, expense, offended husband, humiliated queen, or future claimant. The cost arrived later and was often paid by other people. Queens paid immediately through surveillance. Mistresses paid through insecurity. Children paid through ambiguous status. Kingdoms paid when private families became public crises. The king's freedom distributed risk outward. A queen accused of adultery concentrated that risk upon herself. The government could arrest one woman, execute alleged lovers, declare children illegitimate, and claim the dynasty had been purified. Punishment simplified uncertainty. The dead could no longer answer. This is why the scaffold appears so often in stories about royal women. Execution was not the normal end of every queen accused of sexual misconduct. Many were imprisoned, divorced, confined, or politically destroyed. But death offered finality. It removed the body considered dangerous. Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard are memorable because one king executed 2 wives within 6 years. This was not ordinary even by Tudor standards. Henry's remaining wives survived through death in childbirth, annulment, or widowhood. The rhyme makes 6 marriages seem like one repeated custom. They were 6 different political crises. The executions nevertheless changed queenship. Anne of Cleves feared what had happened to Anne Boleyn and cooperated with annulment. Catherine Parr later faced danger when conservative enemies attempted to use her religious interests against her. She survived by reconciling with Henry and presenting herself as a submissive wife seeking instruction. The memory of the scaffold shaped behavior even when no adultery was alleged. A queen did not need to commit a sexual offense to understand what sexual suspicion could do. She needed only to remember the women buried in the Tower Chapel. Royal households developed elaborate etiquette around this danger. Access to the queen's bedchamber followed rank. Male physicians might enter under controlled conditions. Confessors, relatives, and ambassadors met her in recognized settings. Ladies carried messages. Doors and curtains created boundaries. The rules protected dignity and produced witnesses. Travel made control harder. A royal progress moved the court through temporary lodgings. Rooms were unfamiliar. Passages connected in unexpected ways. Servants slept wherever space allowed. Catherine Howard's meetings with Culpeper occurred during such movement, assisted by Lady Rochford. The travelling court created opportunities the fixed palace restricted. Night increased uncertainty. Candles offered limited light. Bed curtains concealed movement. Servants might recognize voices rather than faces. A person entering one room could claim another purpose. Investigations later reconstructed darkness through testimony. Letters offered clearer evidence but greater risk. A private message required a trusted carrier. The carrier could betray the sender. The recipient could preserve the letter. Searchers could uncover it. Catherine's surviving letter became more dangerous than any spoken denial. Ink outlived the meeting. Kings also wrote compromising letters. Henry's letters to Anne Boleyn revealed desire and frustration during the years he pursued her. They survived because they entered the Vatican collections after being taken or intercepted. The king's words became historical romance. A queen's similar words could become treason evidence. Again, preservation followed power unevenly. The law itself often described women through relation to men. Daughter, wife, widow, queen consort, mistress had no single legal identity. A woman's property, household, and reputation changed with marriage. Adultery threatened not only emotion, but the legal organization of inheritance. For ordinary husbands, uncertainty could direct property to another man's child. For kings, it could direct a kingdom. Royal law magnified household anxiety. The crown turned the husband's fear into state security. This connection explains why the double standard survived even where moral teaching demanded equality. The law asked different practical questions. Could this man's affair place a falsely legitimate child in his wife's womb? No. Could this woman's affair place another man's child in her husband's household? Yes. Patriarchal inheritance treated that difference as decisive. Modern genetic knowledge changes the practical uncertainty, but not the history built upon it. DNA testing can establish biological paternity with great confidence. Early modern courts had no equivalent. They used marriage, timing, access, confession, and reputation. A queen's guarded household functioned as a political technology for creating certainty. The technology was imperfect. Servants could lie, doors could open, rumors could grow. A king could invent guilt, but the monarchy needed confidence more than perfect truth. Ceremony and surveillance produced enough. Birth itself completed the process. Witnesses attended royal labor. The newborn was displayed. Officials followed the child into care. These practices prevented substitution rumors. The queen's sexual surveillance protected paternity before birth. Birth witnesses protected identity after it. A chain of observation connected royal bed to royal cradle. The king's mistress stood outside that chain. Her pregnancy might be hidden until necessary. The child could be raised privately. Acknowledgement could occur later. No kingdom required immediate proof unless the king chose to provide it. Illegitimacy allowed flexibility. The queen possessed none. Her pregnancy belonged to the calendar of state. A delayed birth, early birth, or absence of pregnancy all attracted interpretation. Her body could not disappear into private life. This helps explain why royal marriage could become emotionally lonely. The queen lived among attendants but lacked privacy. The king could seek intimacy elsewhere. Her own friendships with men carried risk. Even innocent companionship could become gossip. The position provided company without freedom. Some royal marriages still contained affection and partnership. Not every king was openly unfaithful. Not every queen lived under constant terror. Couples worked together, grieved children, governed, prayed, traveled, and exchanged letters. The unequal rule existed even when no one used it. A good marriage could soften the structure. It could not remove it. If succession failed or politics changed, the same questions returned. Who is the heir? Is the marriage valid? Can the queen be trusted? Mistresses appeared most powerful when the queen could not answer the dynasty's need. Bessie Blount's son mattered because Catherine had no surviving son. Anne Boleyn mattered because Henry believed Catherine would bear no more children. Jane Seymour gained importance while Anne's marriage weakened. Favor followed reproductive anxiety. At Versailles, the queen had already produced a legitimate dauphin, allowing mistresses to occupy courtly space without threatening immediate succession. The law had its heir. The king pursued affection elsewhere. This did not remove humiliation, but it reduced urgency. When no legitimate child existed, every illegitimate child became more politically visible. Charles II's court proved this. Henry VIII's court proved it. Fertility outside, marriage exposed failure inside it. The Queen was often blamed for that failure because motherhood was her public duty. Medical understanding of fertility was limited. A king who fathered a bastard could claim proof that the problem lay with his wife. Henry Fitzroy's birth supported Henry VIII's confidence in himself. Catherine's losses appeared to confirm fault in her body or marriage. Modern medicine knows fertility depends upon both partners and chance. Early courts mixed biology with theology. A failed pregnancy could be divine judgment. A son could be approval. Henry interpreted Edward's birth as validation. Women carried the conclusions. The mistress who produced a son could gain favor, but also danger. Her child became useful. Her family became ambitious. The Queen's supporters resented her. If the king later abandoned her, the child remained evidence of the relationship. Motherhood tied her permanently to a court that did not give her a crown. Some mistresses converted favor into durable family advancement. Titles, marriages, and land allowed descendants to remain important long after the affair ended. The British aristocracy contains lines descending from royal illegitimate children. Private desire became genealogy. Queens produced sovereigns. Mistresses produced nobles. The distinction was imperfect but powerful. Both changed the future. Only one was authorized to continue the crown. This authorization explains the harshness of female adultery more clearly than simple jealousy. A jealous husband might punish a wife. A monarchy punished a threat to classification. The Queen's child had to remain inside the legitimate box. Any man entering her chamber threatened to erase the label. The accused lover also faced exceptional danger. A courtier sleeping with a married woman risked scandal. A courtier accused of sleeping with the Queen challenged the king directly. He might be charged with treason, mutilated, hanged, beheaded, or otherwise destroyed. The law punished the outsider attempting to enter royal blood. Henry Norris had served Henry VIII intimately and held great favor. His alleged relationship with Anne Boleyn was almost certainly false. The accusation transformed loyal access into betrayal. A man permitted near the royal couple had supposedly crossed the final boundary. His closeness made the charge believable enough for enemies. Thomas Culpeper also belonged near Henry. He was a gentleman of the king's privy chamber. Catherine Howard's meetings with him, therefore, carried a second betrayal. The Queen admitted a man trusted by the king. Private service gave him opportunity. Royal households required men and women to live close together, while pretending dangerous attraction could be controlled by etiquette. Young courtiers danced, hunted, played music, exchanged jokes, and served in chambers. Marriage negotiations surrounded them. Desire did not stop at the palace gate. The court managed it through supervision. The system sometimes failed. More often, accusation claimed it had failed. Because sex was private, prosecution depended upon surrounding behavior, a confession, a letter, a witness at a door, a repeated rumor. The absence of direct evidence did not prevent conviction. This made adultery a useful political charge. It was difficult to disprove completely. The accused could deny the act. The government could answer that secrecy was the point. Every lack of witness became evidence of concealment. Anne Boleyn's innocence did not save her, because the case was not designed as an open investigation. Catherine Howard's partial admissions did not produce mercy, because the government expanded the legal meaning of betrayal. In both cases, the king's desired outcome shaped procedure. Kings did face judgment for their affairs, but rarely from wives. Parliaments, churches, nobles, and public opinion could criticize them. A powerful foreign family might object to a queen's humiliation. Mistresses could become diplomatic problems, yet enforcement against the sovereign remained weak. The king often controlled the institutions that might punish him. Confession offered one form of restraint. A Christian king feared sin and salvation. Clergy could refuse approval. Illness or age could inspire reform. Louis XIV's later life became more devout, and public mistresses disappeared. Spiritual consequence mattered even when legal consequence did not. A queen's spiritual and legal dangers combined. She could be called sinner and traitor. The same alleged act threatened soul and state. Punishment, therefore, appeared righteous as well as political. The court's public reaction often followed survival. While a mistress held favor, courtiers praised her. After her fall, they remembered arrogance. While a queen held rank, attendants proclaimed loyalty. After accusation, witnesses discovered suspicious moments. Memory adjusted to power. This makes memoirs and ambassadorial reports valuable but difficult. Observers carried bias. Foreign ambassadors sought useful intelligence. Courtiers defended patrons. Later writers enjoyed scandal. No source enters the bedchamber without motive. The historian must therefore separate several questions. What was alleged? What can be proved? Why was the allegation useful? How did the court respond? What law allowed punishment? The answers may differ. Anne Boleyn was alleged to have committed multiple adulteries and incest. The evidence does not support guilt. The allegations were useful because Henry wanted freedom and her enemies wanted removal. The court responded with rapid conviction. Treason law allowed execution. Catherine Howard concealed premarital relationships and secretly met Culpeper. Evidence supports more misconduct than in Anne's case. But questions of coercion and consummation remain. The allegations were useful because the king's honor and marriage had collapsed. Parliament created a route to punishment. Montespan was accused through association with the affair of the poisons. Evidence about her involvement remains uncertain. The scandal was useful to rivals and coincided with declining favor. She was not executed. She was gradually excluded. Different courts chose different endings. This variety prevents a simple rule. Queens did not always die. Mistresses did not always prosper. Kings did not always escape reputation. But the direction of risk remained unequal. The queen's suspected adultery touched succession. The king's adultery usually did not. The title asks why kings could keep mistresses while queens risked execution. The answer is not that every society openly gave kings a written license. The answer is that royal institutions were built to preserve male inheritance through female chastity. A king's affairs could be contained in a separate category. A queen's affair could not. Containment required illegitimacy. The king acknowledged the child as his but not the queen's. Titles and money could follow without the crown. Everyone knew the difference. The system turned adultery into a manageable side branch. The Queen's imagined affair destroyed the same boundary. A child born inside marriage automatically appeared legitimate. If the father were another man, the side branch would be hidden in the trunk. That image frightened dynasties for centuries. Modern readers may find the distinction brutal because it reduced women to vessels of succession. It allowed male desire greater space. It punished uncertainty with surveillance. It turned accusation into state security. Yet understanding the logic prevents the past from becoming a cartoon. Kings were not free because everyone thought adultery was admirable. Queens were not punished only because husbands were jealous. The system connected sex to inheritance, law, diplomacy, religion, and masculine honor. That connection produced the double standard. It also produced resistance. Catherine of Aragon refused to accept that her marriage was false. Anne Boleyn defended herself at trial. Catherine Howard attempted to navigate interrogation while terrified. Anne of Cleves negotiated survival. Catherine Parr used submission strategically. These women were not passive pieces on a board. They acted within dangerous limits. Mistresses acted too. They pursued security for children. They built patronage networks. They supported art and religion. They married, withdrew, negotiated, and sometimes refused. Reducing them to seductresses repeats the moral language used to protect kings. The most accurate history keeps power visible. A royal affair joined people of unequal rank. The king could usually end it. The woman could rarely control how it would be remembered. If a child appeared, his acknowledgement decided status. If scandal appeared, her name carried it. Queens had rank, but not equal sexual authority. Mistresses had access, but not equal security. The king possessed both authority and choice. This is the central imbalance. The court around them benefited from it. Families advanced daughters toward royal attention. Ministers used mistresses as channels. Enemies used sexual accusations. Parliaments adjusted laws. Artists received patronage. Clergy preached repentance. The private life of one man created work for an entire political world. No palace door separated love from government. The king's bedroom influenced appointments. The queen's bed produced heirs. The mistress's apartment received petitioners. The nursery prepared succession. The scaffold corrected what the court called betrayal. By morning, the palace returned to ceremony. The king appeared dressed and guarded. The queen sat beneath a canopy. The mistress occupied the place favor allowed. Courtiers bowed according to rank. Nothing in the public arrangement revealed the arguments, fears, and negotiations of the night. Ceremony made the monarchy look stable. Sexual politics revealed how fragile it was. One child could secure a dynasty. One miscarriage could reopen every question. One affair could create a noble family. One accusation could erase a queen. The crown appeared to rest upon gold, armies, and law. It also rested upon trust in a marriage bed. To see that trust operating in another court returned to England after the civil wars. Charles II came back to the throne in 1660 after years of exile. He married Catherine of Braganza 2 years later. She arrived from Portugal carrying a valuable dowry and an alliance. Her marriage brought England trading privileges and territories, including Bombay and Tangier. The union mattered to governments before the couple had spent ordinary time together. Catherine entered a court already shaped by Charles's relationships. Barbara Palmer, later Duchess of Cleveland, was one of the most prominent. She bore the king several children and possessed enough influence that politicians treated her seriously. Charles's marriage did not end the relationship. The new queen had to encounter a mistress whose position had developed before her arrival. The situation produced a struggle over Catherine's household. Charles wanted Barbara appointed as one of the queen's bedchamber women. Catherine resisted. The demand was more than personal insult. A bedchamber appointment would place the mistress inside the queen's daily ceremonial space, giving royal adultery an official-looking position. The queen's household was one of the few areas where she might expect authority. The king attempted to bring his favorite into it. Catherine's resistance eventually failed. She had limited allies in a foreign court and depended upon the husband causing the humiliation. The episode shows why the phrase "tolerated mistress" can be too gentle. Tolerance was sometimes demanded from the queen. Silence could be enforced through isolation. Charles's later mistresses included actresses, aristocratic women, and foreign-born favorites. Nell Gwyn became famous for wit and theatrical life. Louise de Querouaille gained titles and drew suspicion because of her French connections. Different women attracted different kinds of hostility. One seemed English and amusing. Another appeared foreign and politically dangerous. The king's desire became a way for subjects to discuss religion and foreign policy. Catherine of Braganza gave birth to no surviving child. She experienced miscarriages and serious illness. Charles had many children outside marriage, yet the queen's nursery remained empty. The contrast followed her throughout the reign. Enemies sometimes attacked Catherine politically. During the fabricated Popish plot crisis, accusations attempted to connect the Catholic queen to conspiracy. Charles defended her. Her position survived, but the episode shows that sexual innocence alone did not make queens safe. Religion, foreign origin, and faction offered other routes of attack. Catherine's childlessness did not allow Charles's illegitimate sons to move automatically into succession. The Duke of Monmouth attracted supporters, but lawful inheritance still pointed toward the king's brother. When Charles died, Catherine became Queen Dowager. The mistress's children remained nobles. The crown moved to James. This separation had protected Catherine's formal position even while her marriage was publicly violated. She remained the only queen. No mistress could wear the crown merely because she had produced sons. Ceremony preserved a hierarchy that intimacy ignored. A royal mistress, therefore, lived close to the throne without sitting upon it. That distance could feel small during years of favor. It became enormous at succession. The king died. The queen retained a recognized title, household, and diplomatic identity. The mistress depended upon settlements, children, and whatever property had been secured before death. The death of the king often ended the private government around him. Petitioners stopped visiting the favorite's rooms. Servants looked for new positions. Letters disappeared. Enemies returned. A woman who had once influenced appointments could become an inconvenient reminder of the previous reign. Children offered the strongest protection. A recognized royal son or daughter linked the mistress permanently to powerful families. Barbara's descendants entered the aristocracy. Louis XIV's legitimized children married into princely houses. The mother's favor could fade while her bloodline remained near court. The Queen's child, however, inherited a different burden. A legitimate prince belonged to the state from birth. His household, education, marriage, and religion attracted political attention. The mother gained security through him, but she also risked losing control of him to counselors and custom. Producing the heir did not create ordinary motherhood. It completed a public duty. This difference shaped grief. When a mistress lost a child, the pain could remain within a limited circle unless the king had acknowledged the infant. When a queen miscarried, diplomats reported it. Foreign rulers adjusted plans. Churches prayed. The court discussed whether she could conceive again. Her body became news before recovery began. Catherine of Aragon endured this repeatedly. Maria Theresa of Spain gave birth to 6 children and buried 5 before adulthood. Catherine of Braganza carried hope without producing a surviving heir. Their husbands' affairs continued beside these losses. The double standard was not only legal, it determined who could seek comfort elsewhere and who had to resume dynastic expectation. Kings sometimes claimed emotional need as justification. A political marriage might lack attraction. The queen might be ill, pregnant, absent, or estranged. A mistress could offer conversation and affection unavailable in formal ceremony. These explanations describe real human experiences. They do not explain why only one spouse received permission to act upon them. Queens also experienced loneliness, unwanted marriage, illness, and disappointment. Their friendships were restricted precisely because intimacy could be misread. The system treated male desire as an inconvenience to manage and female desire as evidence to control. Not all royal favorites were sexual partners. Kings formed close relationships with male and female courtiers for affection, advice, amusement, or political usefulness. Contemporaries could sexualize those relationships, regardless of evidence. A favorite's power invited rumors because private influence required explanation. Sex became the easiest one. Queens faced the same distortion. A male secretary, musician, physician, confessor, or courtier might spend legitimate time near her. Enemies could turn access into desire. The accusation did not require a witness to the act. It required a story connecting opportunity with motive. Anne Boleyn's musicians and chamber servants became supposed lovers. Catherine Howard's actual secret meetings made the story easier. The court's architecture supplied opportunity in both cases. People serving the monarchy were close enough to become suspect. A queen's ladies occupied a particularly dangerous position. They guarded privacy while witnessing it. They carried messages and arranged meetings. They could protect their mistress or become the evidence that condemned her. Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, served both Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard in different capacities. Her name became linked to the destruction of 2 queens. Popular history often presents Jane as a woman who betrayed Anne and then encouraged Catherine's adultery. The evidence for her role in Anne's case is less clear than later legend suggests. Her assistance in Catherine's meetings with Culpeper is better supported. Even so, her motives remain uncertain. Fear, loyalty, pressure, and court obedience may all have played a part. She was executed because intimate service had placed her inside the secret. The king did not need to enter the meeting room. A lady had made access possible. The servant paid with the queen. This reveals another imbalance hidden below rank. Royal sexual politics endangered people who received none of the pleasure or power. Messengers, doorkeepers, ladies, musicians, friends. A king's affair could reward an entire family. A queen's alleged affair could execute an entire group. The men accused with Anne Boleyn did not all share one relationship with her. Some belonged to different court networks. The prosecution joined them through the Queen. Her body became the center of a conspiracy large enough to justify destruction. Catherine Howard's case drew Derham's earlier relationship and Culpeper's later meetings into one continuous story of sexual corruption. Time collapsed. Conduct before marriage became evidence about conduct after it. The government transformed biography into character. Women's reputations were often written this way. One relationship explained every later action. Youthful behavior became permanent identity. A man with several partners might appear experienced. A woman with several allegations appeared naturally unchaste. The double standard turned sequence into destiny. This is why Catherine Howard's age matters. She may have been only 18 or 19 when executed. The relationships used against her began while she was younger, in a household where adults failed to protect her. Descriptions of her as a reckless seductress remove the unequal age and power around those encounters. The Tudor court did not use modern concepts of grooming or coercive control. It asked whether she had consented, promised marriage, concealed the past, and met another man as queen. Modern interpretation cannot simply replace the past court's categories. It can notice what those categories ignored. Culpeper's own history included accusations of serious sexual violence, though royal favor had protected him. This context changes the way Catherine's affectionate letter may be read. A young queen could write passionately because she desired him. She could also write to keep a dangerous man satisfied. The page does not tell us which emotion dominated. Uncertainty should remain uncertainty. A professional script does not need to solve every private mystery. It needs to show why the court claimed certainty and what that certainty achieved. Catherine's death restored Henry's public honor. The unresolved person disappeared beneath the legal conclusion. Anne Boleyn's reputation followed a similar afterlife. Catholic writers portrayed her as immoral and destructive. Protestant writers later treated her as a reforming heroine and mother of Elizabeth I. Romantic histories turned her into seductress, victim, strategist, or true love. Each age rebuilt the queen from the needs of its own story. The accusations remained central because sex is memorable. A debate over patronage or foreign policy requires explanation. 5 lovers and an execution require only a sentence. The sensational charge survives more easily than the weak evidence beneath it. Royal mistresses also became simplified characters. Nell Gwyn became the witty national favorite. Louise de Querouaille became the foreign agent. Montespan became the ambitious beauty touched by poison scandal. La Vallière became the repentant sinner. These images preserve one quality and erase the rest. A mistress's real life included pregnancy, money, family negotiations, religious conscience, aging, rivals, and uncertain future. Her position was not a continuous party. She lived inside the king's attention, and attention changes. Physical aging mattered, because royal favor often celebrated youth. A queen's rank could survive changes in appearance. A mistress's power might not. This encouraged competition and intensified anxiety. The court watched the king notice someone new. Everyone understood what followed. The favorite's rooms emptied gradually. Visits became shorter. Gifts stopped. A rival received the apartment closer to the king. No formal dismissal was required. Distance announced the end. Queens could also lose private attention while retaining public role. Maria Theresa continued as queen, while Montespan dominated courtly affection. Catherine of Aragon remained Henry's wife in her own conviction, while Anne occupied his thoughts and later his court. Public and private status separated slowly and painfully. This separation gave the queen one advantage. Her title did not depend upon daily attraction. It depended upon marriage. The king therefore needed law, church, death, or political force to remove her. A mistress could be displaced by boredom. The same advantage produced danger. Because the queen was difficult to move, enemies required a larger charge. Adultery, treason, incest, invalid marriage, or religious conspiracy provided enough weight. The accusation had to match the rank. A minor favorite could be ignored. A queen had to be rewritten. Her coronation, title, and children remained in public memory. The government needed a story explaining why yesterday's sacred wife was today's criminal. Sexual betrayal offered that story. After Anne Boleyn's execution, official life moved quickly. Jane Seymour appeared as lawful hope. Portraits and ceremonies reorganized the dynasty. Elizabeth's status changed. Courtiers adjusted language. The palace did not stop to process contradiction. Monarchy survives by making the new order look inevitable. After Catherine Howard's execution, Henry had no child by her to reclassify. Her queenship could be treated as a brief mistake. Silence covered the marriage more easily. The difference in motherhood shaped memory. Anne remained mother of a future queen. Catherine left no royal child to preserve a place. Elizabeth I's accession later transformed Anne's afterlife. The executed traitor was now mother of the reigning queen. Official memory could not simply repeat every accusation without insulting Elizabeth's lineage. Dynastic success repaired part of a woman's reputation after death. Had Elizabeth disappeared in childhood, Anne's story might have remained almost entirely in the hands of enemies. A daughter kept the mother, politically, alive. This is another way royal children shaped the fate of women who bore them. Queens regnant complicate the pattern. A queen consort was the wife of a king. A queen regnant ruled in her own right. The difference changed the distribution of power. A reigning queen could appoint favorites and conduct relationships with greater authority because no husband stood above her as sovereign. Yet female rulers did not receive the same easy sexual freedom as male rulers. Their relationships attracted intense scrutiny. Marriage threatened to transfer influence to a husband. Pregnancy still raised succession questions. A male favorite could be accused of ruling through intimacy. Gender judgment remained. Catherine II of Russia, commonly called Catherine the Great, had male favorites and exercised sovereign authority. Her position shows that the rule was not simply that all women were physically incapable of royal sexual freedom. Political sovereignty mattered. She was not a queen consort guarded to preserve a husband's lineage. She was the ruler. Even then, rumors about the paternity of her son Paul and sensational stories about her sexuality became tools used to diminish her political achievement. A male ruler's affairs appeared as part of biography. A female ruler's affairs could become the biography. The judgment changed form without disappearing. Elizabeth I chose not to marry and built part of her public image around virginity. Remaining unmarried avoided the problem of a husband's authority, though it left succession uncertain. Her friendships with male favorites produced gossip. She used the possibility of marriage diplomatically without surrendering control. The Virgin Queen image turned chastity into sovereignty. For a consort, chastity protected the king's heirs. For Elizabeth, chastity protected her own independence. The same virtue served different political purposes. A reigning queen who produced a child still faced paternity scrutiny. The child inherited through her, reducing the danger that a false father would break the royal bloodline. But the identity and rank of the father affected legitimacy and politics. Marriage remained important. Biology did not erase law. This distinction helps refine the title. Kings enjoyed greater freedom not only because they were men. They were sovereign men within patriarchal inheritance systems. Queen's consort possessed female rank without final authority. Queens regnant possessed authority, but still faced gendered scrutiny. Power altered the rule. It did not make judgment equal. By the 18th and 19th centuries, European monarchies increasingly avoided executing queens for adultery. Law, public opinion, constitutional government, and ideas of punishment changed. But the double standard did not disappear. It moved into separation, public investigation, divorce law, and reputation. The marriage of George IV and Caroline of Brunswick offers a later example. Their relationship failed almost immediately. Both lived separately and faced accusations of sexual misconduct. George's affairs were well known. Caroline's conduct became the subject of organized inquiry. When George became king in 1820, he attempted to end the marriage and deprive Caroline of the title of queen. The government introduced the Pains and Penalties Bill, alleging adultery and seeking divorce. Witnesses described her behavior abroad. The proceeding became a public spectacle. Caroline was not sent to the Tower. She gained popular support as a woman mistreated by an unpopular husband. Crowds followed the case. The bill passed the House of Lords by so narrow a margin that the government withdrew it rather than risk defeat elsewhere. The Queen survived the accusation legally, though she was excluded from George's coronation and died the following year. The scaffold had disappeared. Public trial of the woman remained. The case revealed a monarchy operating under stronger constitutional limits. George could not simply command conviction. Parliament, newspapers, witnesses, lawyers, and public opinion shaped the outcome. The king's sexual reputation weakened his moral position. A double standard still existed, but enforcement had become contested. English divorce law later preserved an explicit inequality. Under the Matrimonial Causes Act of 1857, a husband could obtain divorce on the ground of his wife's adultery alone. A wife generally had to prove her husband's adultery together with another serious offense. The ancient concern with female fidelity survived in modern statute. In 1923, legislation placed adultery on a more equal footing as a ground for divorce. The change came long after queens stopped facing execution for the offense. Legal equality developed in stages. Ending the scaffold did not end the structure that had supported it. Modern constitutional monarchies separate private relationships from succession more clearly, though scandal still attracts public attention. Succession is governed by statute. Births are documented. Paternity can be tested scientifically. Divorce and remarriage operate through civil law. The Queen's Chamber is no longer guarded as the only technology capable of proving dynasty. Public fascination remains. Royal relationships continue to generate headlines because monarchy still joins family with institution. A marriage is personal and constitutional at once. An heir is a child and a future office holder. The old connection has weakened without disappearing completely. The historical double standard also survives in ordinary language. Powerful men are described as having affairs. Women are more often defined by them. A king's list of mistresses becomes colorful detail. A queen's alleged lover becomes the central mystery of her life. Narrative can preserve inequality after law changes. This is why it matters to write the stories carefully. Bessie Blount was more than the mother of Henry Fitzroy. Anne Boleyn was more than an accusation. Catherine Howard was more than a letter. Maria Theresa was more than the wife who endured Montespan. Mistresses and queens lived complete lives beyond the king's bed. The title draws attention through contrast. The script must then explain the system without repeating its judgment. Calling every mistress ambitious and every queen innocent would create another simplification. Some women pursued influence. Some relationships involved affection. Some involved pressure. Some accusations had evidence. Others were manufactured. Power remained unequal in all of them. We can now return to the opening room. The king is with another woman. Courtiers know. A servant carries a gift. A petitioner waits near her apartment. The queen hears the same rumors everyone else hears. No guard comes for the king. Now change only one detail. A man is suspected of entering the queen's room. The palace reacts differently. Doors are questioned. Ladies are separated. Letters are searched. Dates are compared. The king's honor becomes a government matter. The difference begins before guilt is established. The mistress receives a present because the relationship is understood. The queen's alleged lover receives interrogation because the relationship must not exist. One form of adultery can be named. The other must be conspiracy. This is the central mechanism. The king's illegitimate child is publicly placed outside succession. The queen's allegedly illegitimate child might be hidden inside it. Public exclusion made male adultery politically manageable. Possible concealment made female adultery politically explosive. Everything else gathered around that fear. Christian morality supplied sin. Patriarchy supplied control. Inheritance supplied property. Monarchy supplied treason. Masculine honor supplied anger. Court faction supplied accusers. Law supplied punishment. No single piece created the scaffold. Together, they made it appear reasonable to the people ordering it. Anne Boleyn climbed the steps because her enemies converted weak allegations into a threat against king and succession. Catherine Howard followed because secret contact and concealed history were converted into legal betrayal. The women's cases differed. The machinery around them was recognizable. Louis XIV's mistresses walked through a different court. Their children were acknowledged and separated from the Dauphin. The system absorbed the affairs without pretending they were lawful marriage. The women gained influence, but remained removable. Charles II acknowledged sons who became dukes, but not kings. His queen remained childless and lawful. When succession arrived, marriage defeated fertility. The rule worked exactly as designed. Caroline of Brunswick later stood before Parliament rather than an executioner. Public resistance prevented the king from receiving everything he wanted. The old inequality had met new limits. Across these courts, royal sex was never purely private. It moved money. It created titles. It changed alliances. It produced children. It destroyed reputations. It shaped laws. The bedchamber was part of government because family was part of government. The queen's body carried the heaviest burden because it was the recognized entrance to legitimate succession. The king's body produced royal blood wherever it went, but law decided which blood counted. That decision gave him freedom and gave her surveillance. The mistress occupied the gap between blood and law. Her children could look like the king, carry his name, and receive his affection. They remained marked by the absence of marriage. Her influence could approach official power. It remained marked by the absence of office. The queen occupied the opposite gap. She possessed law and ceremony even when affection disappeared. Her children received legitimacy. Her danger came from any suggestion that private reality did not match public status. Neither role was simple. The queen was not powerless. The mistress was not secure. The king was not free from every consequence, but only one person usually possessed the authority to redefine the others. Henry could turn Anne from desired woman to queen, then from queen to traitor. Louis could raise Montespan near the center of Versailles, then close his private rooms to her. Charles could acknowledge a child and choose the title the child received. Royal favor classified people. Women sought ways to make classification durable. Marriage, property, children, religious retreat, family alliance, public sympathy, a letter from the king, a title granted to a son. Each offered some protection against the day private affection ended. The strongest protection remained lawful marriage. That is why Anne Boleyn refused the ordinary mistress's place. It is why foreign princesses crossed Europe to marry strangers. It is why queens defended marriages even after affection vanished. The title carried survival, household, and legitimacy. It also carried the scaffold's shadow. The higher the lawful position, the more dangerous the accusation that she had violated it. A mistress could lose favor. A queen could be declared a threat to the crown. One part of the system remains easy to overlook. Royal mistresses were not always unmarried women waiting outside respectable society. Some were wives, Their husbands occupied an uncomfortable position because the king's desire crossed another man's marriage, while royal authority limited the husband's response. Madame de Montespan was married to Louis-Henri de Pardaillan de Gondren, Marquis de Montespan. Her husband did not quietly accept the relationship with Louis XIV. He protested and behaved in ways that made his humiliation visible. According to later accounts, he adopted mourning symbols and treated his wife as socially dead. The gestures challenged the polite fiction that royal desire erased ordinary marriage. The king possessed power, but he could not make the husband feel honored. A nobleman was expected to control and defend his household. If the monarch took his wife, resistance risked royal anger, while silence invited ridicule. The husband's masculinity became trapped between obedience and honor. This helps explain why royal mistresses could produce resentment beyond the queen's apartments. The affair did not only violate one marriage, it demonstrated that the king stood above the domestic authority expected from other men. A subject who punished an adulterous rival might face the law. A subject whose rival was the king had almost nowhere to appeal. Families sometimes responded differently. A woman's relatives could welcome royal attention if it brought offices, pensions, or marriages. Brothers advanced. Parents negotiated. Children received rank. The household converted sexual risk into political opportunity. Outsiders then accused the entire family of selling access to the king. The woman stood at the center of interests that were not identical to her own. Her husband wanted honor. Her birth family wanted advancement. The king wanted intimacy. Courtiers wanted patronage. The queen wanted dignity. The mistress's personal wishes could become the least documented part of the arrangement. A recognized child made these negotiations more concrete. The king could issue letters of legitimization or public grants. The child received a surname, title, arms, property, and place within court hierarchy. Documents transformed private paternity into public status. Recognition also fixed the category. The king admitted, "This is my child." At the same moment, the law stated, "This child was not born within my lawful marriage." Acknowledgement honored the blood and preserved the boundary. Heraldry could display the distinction visually. An illegitimate royal child might use royal symbols modified by a mark showing difference. The coat of arms announced connection without equality. Anyone reading it understood both messages. Royal blood was present. The direct, legitimate line remained separate. Titles performed the same work. Henry Fitzroy became a duke. Charles II's sons received dukedoms. Louis XIV's legitimized children married at high rank. The monarchy gave them enough honor to prevent disgrace and enough distinction to protect succession. This balance did not always satisfy the children. A royal bastard grew up knowing the king as father, while seeing a lawful cousin or uncle stand closer to the crown. Wealth could not remove the difference. Monmouth's rebellion shows how royal blood and legal exclusion could become a dangerous combination. The queen observed these children too. Some lived near court. Some entered marriages arranged by the king. Their existence made the husband's infidelity permanent and visible. A passing affair could leave a duke seated at ceremonies for decades. Yet queens sometimes accommodated illegitimate children because open hostility offered little benefit. A recognized child was not responsible for birth. The king controlled rewards. Court harmony required careful behavior. A queen could protect dignity by appearing generous where private feeling may have been far more complicated. Mistresses also negotiated with one another across time. The outgoing favorite might help introduce or employ a woman who later replaced her. Madame de Montespan brought Madame de Maintenon into the household of her children. Maintenon's role gave her repeated access to Louis XIV. The arrangement designed to secure Montespan's family helped create the relationship that displaced her. Court power often turns through ordinary service rather than dramatic confrontation. A nursery can be as political as a ballroom. The governess controls access to children the king loves. She discusses their health and education. She sees the father away from formal counsel. Trust develops through repeated practical work. Maintenon's influence did not arrive only from beauty. It grew through reliability, conversation, religion, and the private world surrounding the king's family. This reminds us that mistress is sometimes too narrow a word for long relationships. Some royal favorites became emotional companions, political confidantes, household organizers, and mothers of several children. Sex opened access. Years of shared life gave the relationship other forms. The queen's relationship with the king could also change beyond romance. Political marriages sometimes developed affection. Others became partnerships in ceremony and parenthood. Some remained distant. A king might respect a queen while pursuing another woman. Human feeling did not follow the legal categories as neatly as succession did. Law required a clear wife and clear heirs. Emotion produced overlapping loyalties. The court's task was to keep emotional disorder from damaging legal order. This is why ceremony mattered so much. At public worship, dining, reception, and procession, the queen's precedence remained visible. The mistress could dominate conversation but not outrank the crown. Seating became political grammar. Who walked first? Who sat beneath a canopy? Who received ambassadors? Who rode beside the king? Private favor could not answer every ceremonial question. Rank did. A mistress who forgot this boundary risked provoking the court. Displaying too much authority made unofficial power look like usurpation. The successful favorite needed to appear influential without claiming queenship. She could request. She could not command publicly. The queen faced the opposite problem. She possessed public authority but might lack private influence. To preserve power, she needed to turn ceremony into relationships, appointments within her household, charity, religious patronage, diplomatic correspondence, and support for families. Queenship was not only reproduction, it offered a political network independent of sexual affection. Catherine of Aragon used that network effectively. Her Spanish connections, popularity, religious standing, and long service made her removal difficult. Henry's desire alone could not erase them. He needed years of legal and institutional change. Anne Boleyn built her own network around reform, family, and patronage. This made her more than a wife who failed to produce a son. It also meant her fall affected people whose careers depended upon her. Sexual charges destroyed a political network under the language of marriage. The mistress's network was usually less formal, but could become equally visible. Petitions clustered around her rooms. Relatives accumulated offices. Artists dedicated works. Foreign diplomats offered gifts or information. Critics counted every advantage as proof of corruption. Some accusations were justified. Favorites could sell access or reward family excessively. Others reflected frustration from people who had failed to gain favor themselves. A courtier excluded from private influence often describes private influence as illegitimate. The complaint may be true and self-interested at once. Rumor moved through this environment as a form of political testing. A story began quietly. Listeners watched whether the king became angry. If no punishment followed, the story spread. If a rival repeated it publicly, the originator remained hidden. Royal sexuality supplied endless material because confirmation was difficult and interest was universal. Servants heard fragments. Ambassadors purchased reports. Pamphleteers sharpened details. Later, memoirists arranged scenes into perfect conversations no one could verify. By the time the story reached history, uncertainty had acquired furniture, clothing, and dialogue. This is why memorable anecdotes should be used carefully. They can express the truth of a situation without recording an exact event. A humiliated husband may indeed have displayed mourning. A frightened queen may have practiced at the block. A king may have spoken a devastating sentence. The image survives because it fits the story. Evidence decides how firmly we repeat it. The broader system does not depend upon every anecdote being exact. Documents establish royal children, titles, prosecutions, marriages, and executions. The unequal law is visible. The private emotion around it must sometimes remain partly hidden. That hidden emotion is worth respecting. Catherine of Aragon left no diary describing the moment she learned of every affair. Maria Theresa did not provide a modern interview about Montespan. Bessie Blount did not record whether she felt affection, fear, ambition, or all three. Silence should not be filled with certainty simply because a dramatic answer would be satisfying. The records preserve the king's decisions more clearly than the women's internal lives. That imbalance is part of the history. Power creates archives. The person granting the title leaves a document. The person receiving unwanted attention may leave none. A careful account, therefore, separates what the court did from what a woman felt. We know Catherine Howard met Culpeper secretly. We cannot measure the balance of desire and coercion inside every meeting. We know Louis XIV favored Montespan. We cannot reconstruct every private negotiation between her husband, and the king. Uncertainty does not weaken the explanation. The system is visible even where emotion is not. Royal marriage guarded legitimate succession. Male adultery was channeled into acknowledged illegitimacy. Female adultery threatened hidden substitution. Law punished the threat more severely. Everything else moved within those boundaries. One legal correction is necessary before we leave the subject. It is tempting to say that adultery by an English queen was automatically treason. The reality was less simple. Adultery was a grave offense, but Anne Boleyn was not condemned merely because the government wrote the word adultery beside her name. The prosecution also alleged that she and the accused men had imagined and plotted the king's death. That claim brought the case within the language of treason. The sexual charges supported the political charge. They suggested that Anne wished to remove Henry so she could marry one of her lovers. They attacked the certainty of succession. They damaged the king's honor. But the legal route depended upon constructing more than an unfaithful marriage. The government presented a conspiracy around the queen's bed. This distinction exposes the weakness of the case. If adultery alone had been enough, there would have been less need for conversations about Henry's death, impossible dates, and a large group of alleged partners. The prosecution required a story capable of turning marital offense into an attack upon sovereignty. Thomas Cromwell's machinery supplied one. Catherine Howard's fall revealed a different problem. Her premarital conduct and concealed relationships did not fit Anne's exact route. The government, therefore, used legislation that made concealment and encouragement of adultery by a queen punishable as treason. Law did not merely discover her offense. Law was adjusted to make the offense carry the required result. This is why the two executions should not be treated as identical repetitions. Anne was tried through allegations that joined adultery to a supposed death plot. Catherine was condemned after investigation. Confession concerning her past, evidence of secret meetings, and a newly sharpened statutory framework. Both cases protected the king. They did so through different legal constructions. The distinction also explains why other queens with damaged marriages were not executed. Catherine of Aragon denied the annulment and remained politically inconvenient for years. Anne of Cleves was removed through an agreed annulment. Catherine Parr faced suspicion over religion rather than sex, and survived by restoring Henry's confidence. The government selected the tool suited to the problem. Royal law was powerful because the king influenced the definition of the crisis. A wife could become invalid. A queen could become traitor. A daughter could become illegitimate and later legitimate again for succession without becoming fully legitimate in every legal sense. Parliamentary acts reorganized family status around political need. The king's affairs required no comparable legal creativity. The law already had a category for children born outside marriage. They were illegitimate. The category protected inheritance without prosecuting the father. This was one of the deepest advantages kings possessed. The system had a ready container for the consequences of their adultery. It had no safe container for the consequences of a queen's adultery. When the feared child did not exist, accusation could still invoke the possibility. Anne Boleyn was not prosecuted because she had presented another man's baby as heir. She had not. The threat to succession operated through imagined risk, dishonor, and alleged conspiracy. The monarchy punished what the conduct might have meant. This is also why sexual accusations could destroy a queen even without pregnancy. Her role required complete confidence. A single proven affair would make future and past conception dates objects of suspicion. The dynasty did not wait for a disputed child. It acted against the possibility. Kings were judged after consequences appeared. Was there an acknowledged bastard? Did the mistress influence policy? Had money been wasted? Queens were judged before consequences could appear. Who entered the chamber? What might have happened? What child might one day be born? The law protected the succession through prevention and fear. This preventive logic made evidence dangerously flexible. The court did not need a false heir in the cradle. It needed a queen represented as capable of producing one, character substituted for outcome. Once she was described as sexually uncontrolled, the state could claim that every dynastic safeguard had failed. The correction, therefore, strengthens rather than weakens the title. Queens did not risk death because one simple ancient rule said, "Adultery equals execution." They risked death because governments could connect suspected sexual conduct to treason, succession, concealment, and the safety of the king. The root was political. That made it adaptable. The answer to our question is therefore complete. Kings kept mistresses because their societies could identify and contain the children of those relationships as illegitimate. Queens risked execution because their children were presumed legitimate, and an affair threatened to place another man's blood inside the succession. The unequal rule was reinforced by religion, inheritance, patriarchy, masculine honor, and the king's control of law. It was not universal in every detail. Not every king was unfaithful. Not every court recognized an official favorite. Not every accused queen died. Not every bastard was excluded forever. Historical systems bend. The central pressure remained. The pressure can be heard in the questions servants were asked. Who entered? How long did he remain? Was the door locked? Who carried the letter? When did the queen last bleed? Where was the king when the child was conceived? The dynasty searched private time for public certainty. The king's mistress faced different questions. Did he visit? What did he give her? Whose appointment did she request? Is she losing favor? Which woman will replace her? The court measured influence rather than legitimacy. Two sets of questions, two kinds of danger. One palace, late at night, the formal rooms empty. Candles are carried through passages. Guards remain beside doors. A lady removes the queen's jewels. A servant places another gift inside the mistress's chamber. The king moves where rank and desire permit him to move. The queen's door closes. The people outside remember who entered. They may never be questioned. They may be questioned years later. Their ordinary memory can become evidence in a trial no one yet expects. The mistress's door closes too. Courtiers remember the visit for another reason. Tomorrow, they will decide whether to bring her a petition. Private rooms produce two forms of public knowledge. Mourning will restore ceremony. The queen will appear in the place marriage gives her. The favorite will appear in the place attention gives her. The king will appear above them both. The arrangement may look permanent. It never is. Affection changes. Children die. Kings age. Factions move. Letters survive. Rumors wait. Law can be rewritten. A woman who enters the palace as a maid may leave as a duchess, a queen, a prisoner, or a name carved into a chapel floor. For tonight, no verdict has been announced. No messenger is running through the corridor. No scaffold is being prepared. There is only a closed door and the political world built around it. The king's affair will become gossip. The queen's suspected affair may become history. And somewhere between the two lies the old fear that governed royal marriage for centuries. The crown must know whose child will wear it next.